I'm Linda Koon. I've been a member of the church since 1972 when we moved back to Nashville after a stint away in graduate school. We had two boys here that we raised and participated in all aspects of the church. I actually attended Westminster while I was at Vanderbilt in the late 60s, although I didn't join at that time. Cathey, when did you get involved?
About the same time. Linda and I were classmates at Vanderbilt, but we just ended up at Westminster separately, but have been great friends through the church for over 50 years. Hard to believe. My husband and I had both been raised as Baptists and didn't really intend to go to the Baptist church after we married. And the wife of one of the elders in this congregation, Ellen Hudson, mother of Katie Regan, approached Wilford, who had just gone to work for her husband in his first job, and said, "You like working with young people, don't you?" And Wilford said, "Yes, ma'am, I do." And she said, "We need advisors for our youth group on Sunday night." And he said, "I would love to do that." And my wife. So we joined immediately. When we went to work with the youth before we joined, and we distinctly remember meeting in the Gray House, which was the mansion on the property where the church was built. And I think the church first bought the front yard all the way down to West End and built the sanctuary. And the clawfoot bathtub had been moved downstairs into the front hall, right inside of the front door. So the minister's son, Pat McGahee's son, and some of his friends would sit in the bathtub while we had meetings. That's just a memory that sticks in my head. But later we moved to the Good Pasture Hall downstairs. Those were fun times, and that's what really got us into the church. And I tell people still, if you want to get involved, be at Westminster and really feel a part, you need to join a group. Well, we got to know all the youth and their parents, and it really brought us into the church. And like Linda said, it's been family for our family. We didn't have any other family in town. We raised our daughter and son here. Hal Hobson recruited me, along with anybody else he could find who could sing at all, to be in the adult choir. And I sang in the choir for 40 years. And sweet members of the congregation would invite our children to come sit with them while I was in choir if my husband was off doing something else. So it's been home all these years.
Yeah, a lot of people our age joined the church about the same time that we did. And so we started out when the young adult class, which is what we were called when we first joined the church, was probably maybe 12 or 15 people on Sunday morning, fairly small. But it rapidly grew, and we met upstairs in the old main building, and then eventually ended up in Good Pasture Hall because we've grown so much. And in fact, the class voluntarily painted Good Pasture Hall because it was in pretty sad shape down there at that time. I think the young people had been meeting down there, and Boy Scouts met down there, and it'd seen some hard times. So we gathered paintbrushes and ladders and all sorts of things, and usually one spouse kept the kids at home while the other spouse came and painted, and then we traded off the second half of the afternoon. And it was a fun time together. I think we did a pretty good job. I'm sure they've painted it since then, but we were kind of proud of ourselves for fixing up Good Pasture Hall. As time went on, many of us we taught ourselves at that time. We just took turns teaching the lesson, volunteering and taking the lesson. But as time went on, we grew enough that we started met in Good Pasture Hall, but we got recruited ourselves to go teach Sunday school. And that took a lot of us out of our own Sunday school classes. And so the class kind of petered out after a while. And then we regrouped again I don't know exactly when it was, but regrouped enough.
30 years ago.
Yeah.
And
then who was it that led the group at that time? Was it
Rory Burke was one, but different people took turns, either teaching or bringing in outside teachers. Right.
And at that point we became more of a group that kept connections with each other more than Sunday school. We had a pretty regular social schedule where everybody could get together, and the people who were teaching Sunday school really appreciated that because they had missed seeing their friends on Sunday mornings because they'd been with the children. while they were teaching. Whoever it was, maybe it was the minister, came to us and said, "We need you to rename your class because you're not young adults anymore, and we need to have a young adult class for people that are younger than you are." It was sort of a wake-up call. We thought we were still pretty young, but so we became the Inquirers at that point.
That's right. And the next group of young adults later became the Pathfinders.
Right. So
both groups, I think, still get together socially.
Yeah.
I can remember back in the haze of my memory when there was only one worship service, and it was at 11. And the church decided somewhere many years ago to start an earlier service, the early service at 8:30. Unsure how it would go, they started it in the chapel. And then eventually the attendance grew to the point where it moved to the main sanctuary. So that's just one little thing that's evolved over the years.
About the time we moved the early service to the main sanctuary, we also did a survey of the Sunday school classes to see what our needs were going forward, providing for the children. It was interesting to see that in grades 3 through 8, each class had fewer than 10 students in each class. But in grades 1 and 2, we had 15 or 18 children in each class. And preschool classes, 3 to 5 years, had 30 to 40 people in each class. This was from all the young families our age who had joined the church all about the same time. So we had to that's when everybody got recruited to be a Sunday school teacher.
It was probably around that time we started extended session too, because there was no place for these little children to go, especially the preschool children, during worship service. So we started something called extended session that was staffed strictly by parents. And my memory is I was the person who organized it the first year or two. But anyway, we recruited parents to take turns to skip church and stay with the littlest children during the worship hours. So that went on for years.
Right. And then about the same time, too, we decided we needed to have a weekday program for the young children, and Mother's Day Out was started. It started out one day a week.
Linda, was there already a kindergarten program
I think
here?
there was already a kindergarten program here, but we didn't have a small children program. And I think we started at 6 months is the earliest we took the children, and then it would go up to the preschool age, which was 3, and for the kindergarten Westminster preschool. It started out with, I think it was just one day a week, 9 to 12, very limited, and then it grew to 2 days a week, 9 to 12, and then it, over the months and years, expanded to 9 to 2. And then finally it extended so that we had an after-school program for children who went to Westminster preschool could stay after they got out at noon. They could stay till 2 if their siblings were in the Mother's Day Out program. Another thing that we did during those early days when we had young families was we had the young adults or the Inquirers, I think it went through Inquirers time also, had a monthly potluck. Most of the mothers at that point were not working. And so we would gather our children in a dish and come to the church on Tuesday nights. The guys would come from their jobs and meet us there, and we would all just have a potluck social together. And it was such fun. The children had a great time running around, and parents enjoyed visiting with each other. It was really nice, something that everybody looked forward to. We finally had to quit doing it when the kids got old enough that we really couldn't control the riot that ensued. But it was fun, and I'll always fondly remember those days.
Hope our children do too.
Yes, I think so.
A highlight for me over all the years we've been at Westminster too has been music, because when we joined, and maybe when you joined, we can remember that there was a very small choir, mostly paid. I was going to say paid. Anyway, it was not a big volunteer choir. It was led by the organist, and 8 or 9 people. One woman was the soloist most every Sunday. Dick Williams, who's still active at Westminster, was sometimes, he said, the only tenor in the choir. But in 1974, after we'd just been here a few years, the church hired Hal Hobson, and along with him came his wife Martha. They were both professional musicians, both organists, and they started a big volunteer choir of adults for the adult choir, and they started what was called a graded children's choir program. So they began with, 5 or 6 year olds, and went up through high school. And they started a handbell choir, and I remember distinctly Ann and Walton Williams either gave the handbells or gave a chunk of money toward it. Anyway, it was our first set of handbells, and I got to be in that handbell choir that Martha Hobson led, and it was so much fun. Hal started lots of musical things. He himself was a prolific composer and arranger of church music, and to this day, we sing every Sunday his version of the Kyrie. Lord have mercy, God have mercy, Lord have mercy. We sing that every Sunday, and Hal composed that music.
I think he also composed the music we used during the communion service.
He did. We
Yes.
often used that,
Yeah.
right? And he recruited at some point a woman who was in her 90s at the time, a church member, Janie Alford. Many of us will remember Janie. Was a single woman who was also the church librarian, and she loved to write poetry, and Hal thought we needed a hymn for every season of the church year. So he and Janie together, she wrote all the lyrics, and he either wrote or either composed or arranged the tunes for these 9 hymns. And for years, that little booklet of those 9 songs was in the back of our hymnals. They're not there. But one of Janie's hymns is in the current Presbyterian hymnal. It's Come, O Spirit, Dwell Among Us, which is the song for Pentecost. And even though this Christmas song that she wrote is not in the hymnal now, we sing it here frequently, sing out the song of the day star on high. And it's vibrant and exciting and beautiful, and Hal put beautiful music to it. We enjoy singing that here still.
One thing I didn't mean to interrupt you, but one thing I remember when Hal came, he was trying to recruit a choir for the first time, and he told everybody, "You're sitting next to somebody in church, and you think they sing well. Tell me." And so if you had to, people were very cautious about singing very loudly in church because they knew they'd get a phone call the next
I
day.
did get a phone call. I've been in high school choir.
But it was successful. He successfully recruited a very fine choir, and we've had wonderful music ever since.
And I will say, he had remedial classes every Monday morning for the altos, and Tuesday morning for the sopranos, and at night for the tenors and basses for years. He taught us all how to sing. Another thing Hal did was to start children's musicals, and when our daughter Eleanor was in the 3rd grade, she and Shelby Bailey and Matt Bumstead got to be the mice in the Christmas musical that was the story of how Silent Night was written. And sweet Dick Williams, who's a member of our church still, was very creative, and he was recruited to make the sets. The performance was in the sanctuary, and Dick had made huge organ pipes to go on either side of the chancel out of cardboard boxes or cardboard. He made an organ console, and the mice danced on the keyboard. You'll have to look it up sometime. Years later, when Mike Kemp was our minister of music, he was a Pied Piper with teenagers and recruited a great group of girls and guys to sing in his choirs, and he started youth choir tours, and I got to chaperone, I think, 3. Everybody had a marvelous time and sang in different churches in different parts of the country. So those are some highlights musically that I can remember. As Wilfred, my husband, and I reflected back over 50 plus years here, we talked about stewardship and giving, and we both over the years chaired the annual giving campaign. And one memory that is just etched in our minds is when, as young adults, we met in the living room of Carol Ann and Tom Graham. And everyone there was asked to write on a index card their income and the amount of money they intended to give to the church that next year. It was anonymous, and they were all collected, and then the list was read out. And that was eye-opening for us and really inspirational. Both people whose incomes seemed modest at the time. Of course, we were all making like $6,000 and $9,000 a year.
Right.
In relation to the income, some gifts were enormous. And that's just been something we've remembered and appreciated, and I think that's one reason why I think it's important to share stories about stewardship and giving, because we learned a lot listening to our friends talk about what that commitment meant.
All in all, Westminster is a great place to raise a family. I am so grateful to God and to the people here for the gifts of friendship and faith that they have given both to me and my family.
One of my favorite verses is Hebrews 10:24, which says, "Inspire one another to acts of love and good deeds." And I continue to be inspired by members of this church who do things that I think, wow, not sure I could do that, but I could do something. Another little interesting piece of church life that I've been involved with for 30 years or more is the Wedding Guild. When Casey Tummy was the minister here, before I was involved in the Wedding Guild, he went to some of the grand ladies of the church, like Ferlil Diefendorf and Becky Wright, elegant, lovely women, and said, I want a group of people to help me with weddings. So after that committee had run for several years, I got involved as a volunteer and eventually chaired it for a long time. And that group has had some wonderful and interesting and amusing experiences, and I'll share one. We met with the bride before, we always met with the bride before her wedding, weeks in advance. And she and her young wedding coordinator said to us, we have the cutest idea. And right then I thought, oh, Casey's not gonna like that. And they said, at the end of the service, we're gonna have a mini bride and a mini groom come down the aisle in a little red wagon. And as soon as I said, oh, I don't know, I'll have to ask the minister. And as soon as we finished meeting, I went and said to Casey, oh my goodness. And that didn't happen. But they did get away with the black gospel choir in the balcony at the end of the service, which was a surprise. And I thought Casey and Polly Brecht, our organist, were just gonna have a heart attack. Casey liked a wedding to be a worship service.
Very traditional.
I think we've relaxed a little bit since then. But Kim married in an 11 o'clock worship service, and the choir was there. And it was all part of the worship
And the young
service.
people all were up in the balcony as they were exiting the church after the wedding. The young people were all up in the balcony yelling and cheering for them as they left the church.